Yeah, no, you're
We'll
welcome.
be starting in just 1 minute. I'm starting the live stream now.
That on your
Okay.
radio? Fine.
Hello. Hello, everyone.
Okay, Madam Council President, we are streaming live now. We're ready to start whenever you are.
Great, thanks. It's 6 o'clock. I'm going to call the meeting of the Middleton Committee of the Whole to order. Our first item of business is called roll call.
Alder Shaper,
Here.
Alder Madden,
Here.
Alder Kalish,
Here.
Mayor Kuhn,
Here.
Council President Nelson,
Here.
Alder Hanairo,
Here.
Alder Lorman, Alder Crow.
Here.
Thank you. Next on the agenda is review and approval of the February 2nd, 2024 meeting minutes. Does anyone have any questions? Hearing none, minutes stand approved. Let's go on to the discussion items. Number 1 is presentation and discussion on local government meetings 101 with Dan Foth. Am I saying Foth? I'm sorry. Adjunct instructor from the UW-Madison Extension. Thank you for coming in.
Thank you. And actually, I'm a local government specialist. I'm not something as lofty as a professor, but thanks for the upgrade in my title. I spoke to some of you last year, so thank you for having me back. I guess I'm not sure if that means because you couldn't find anybody else that would come and do this, or if it was that good last year. But I'm going to go with the second. Down. There.
Is there an extra pen in there, George?
Okay, so my first question is, how many have been in your holding office here, recently elected, less than a year? A couple of you, so you've not heard me speak before. Sorry for your hard luck. How many 1 to 3 years? Pretty much almost everybody else. And how many over 4 years? Okay, great. Thank you. That just gives me some sense of what everybody's level of understanding might be. Also, as I go through the presentation, if you have questions, please ask me as we go. Don't feel like you have to wait till the end. So today's presentation is on how to be an effective alder, roles and meeting procedures. So the first thing to remember for you, especially you new alders, is to know and stay in your lane. So what does that mean? Well, first it starts with your meeting rules. You've got some pretty good meeting rules from October 2014. If you've not taken the time to read these and understand them, please do so, because this is how your meetings run based on these rules and Robert's Rules of Order. And it'll be very helpful to you as you move forward, and also will help you understand why some things work the way they do. Going too fast. So what are some of your roles and responsibilities? Well, first and foremost, and you may have some fun with this later when you get home to talk to your significant other, but you folks should be visionaries. So when you get home tonight, you can tell your family, hey, I'm a visionary, and just see what the reaction is. I know what my wife's would be. Which means you've got a long-term focus.
Mm-hmm.
Your authority is collective versus individual. You as an individual alder have no authority over anything having to do with the city. But together, your collective authority is what makes things happen. And your legislative, you basically have a legislative function. So your job is to decide on the future of the city and what sort of legislative actions need to affect that future. And typically it's limited to collective bargaining, cooperative decision-making, policy, and budget. And your other job is to hold the staff accountable for implementing policy. And anytime you see a reference here, this reference back to your meeting rules. So if you're looking at the slide, trying to figure out what part of the meeting rules are also covered by this area, that's why I've referenced them. So as I mentioned, the leadership and management of the city, you, the mayor, and the city council, or the common council, provide the collective leadership. You should model the way. You should inspire a shared vision. Don't be afraid to challenge the process. If you don't understand something that's going on, it's part of your job to have those conversations, but also help others to act. And I also think about your job, not just from a fiscal standpoint, but also think from the heart. You know, how do your decisions impact your residents? Not just the financial stuff. And really important, remember that the management that's why you've hired a city administrator to run the city for you, to affect your policy decisions. It's not part of your job to get involved in the day-to-day operations. That's the job of the administrator and the staff.
Mr. Polk, may I ask a question?
Yes.
Under the leadership and management, under one of the bullet points was inspire a shared vision. I think for some people, that's a tricky definition because sometimes the city staff will recommend something, but then the constituents of a district are arguing for something completely different. And where does the responsibility lie for the alder with they know the shared vision for the city and yet.
So, I mean, you've got a couple of good examples of your shared vision that you've already agreed to. One is your strategic plan and all of your actions. I mean, you develop a strategic plan. It's got a future forward focus. And so your actions moving forward ought to be consistent with that plan. That's part of the reason you put it together. You had your citizens involved with it, and also your comprehensive plan. And especially for you new folks, if you've not read either or looked at either, I would definitely get a copy and review those documents because those were put together with citywide input. And then specifically to your question, you're always going to have some tension between the staff and the citizens who may have a completely different approach to how the world should operate. I think it depends on whether the question is implementing a policy, which you've already decided on, and the staff has decided this is the best way to implement it, versus creating the policy. Creating the policy, I would listen to everybody who's got something to say about it. Implementing the policy, you've hired professionals. It doesn't mean you don't listen to your citizens, but I think you also have to kind of trust your staff. But I also think it doesn't hurt to ask the staff, why did you decide to go down this road versus the road that some of the residents might want? Does that answer your question?
That's lovely. Yes, I think that will help us in the future.
Okay. It's a lot of responsibility you've given me.
Can I just add to that?
Yeah.
The difficulty gets into the details. Because we're not talking about general large policy things. Somebody comes in, they want a building built on a corner. And the policy is a general policy for the city, but it doesn't tell you exactly what goes on at each point in the city. And so at what point is an alder to be responsive to some specific issue related to their district, as opposed to something in the city that may not be quite so definable in the larger city plan?
Sure. So I was a planning commission chair for my town of Burke, just outside of Madison, Sun Prairie. We had a lot of those kinds of issues where somebody wanted to do something with their land that was contrary to our comprehensive plan and also to the zoning. So part of it is to, and I didn't bring any of these slides tonight, but I think you need to understand positions versus interests.
Mhm.
So the position might be, I should be able to do what I want with my land, but what's the interest in that? What do they get specifically out of it? And if they just don't like the zoning regulation, then I think it's good to have a conversation in terms of, well, if we didn't have zoning, that means your neighbor can do what they want to do with their land also. We have zoning for a reason. Now, they may have a perfectly valid reason to want to create a variance to the zoning or ask for a rezoning, but then that should go through the typical process.
Okay.
Does that help?
Yeah, it does.
Okay, good. All right. Let's see, where am I at here? Okay, so your functions, obviously, to involve, represent, and be accountable to the public. And then we just had two good discussions about how that might work. Determine the services provided. I think adopting the budget is the single most important thing you folks will do as a common council. Obviously, you'll levy the property tax as part of that budget process. You should regulate within the statutory authority. And again, just to remind everybody, you have no management or leadership role outside the board, committees, or commissions that you're part of. So one of the things I also wanted to address is what is the difference between an ordinance and a resolution? Typically, an ordinance creates or prescribes general, uniform, or permanent rules of conduct. And permanent is the key phrase in there. Whereas a resolution typically deals with matters of special or temporary character. So if you want something to be in effect for a very long time, then I would write an ordinance around that item. If you're just conveying your general agreement with it's Rose Day or Rose Month here in the city of Middleton, and you think that's a good idea to have a resolution supporting Rose Month, then have at it. I would caution against resolutions that are not within your general powers. So, balancing the federal budget might be a great idea, but is that something within the power of the Common Council? Probably not. So to me, those kinds of resolutions may make somebody feel good, but they don't really accomplish very much. The other kind of resolution I would avoid is one reaffirming an existing policy. If you have an existing policy, why would you need to reaffirm it? The answer is you don't, because it's already existing. If it's not being enforced for some reason, that's a different issue. Now you have a conversation with the staff about, well, we had this policy, why is it not being enforced? Yes.
I sort of take exception with kind of some of your thoughts on resolution. We have issued kind of, I don't know, maybe it's more proclamation, but where as a city, we do kind of get behind larger things on a national, global sustainability, things like that. I mean, we can't solve the world climate crisis, but yet we take it on ourselves.
Yeah, and I think sustainability is a good example of where you could do some things to help the sustainability issue, as well as the county, as well as the state, as well as the federal government. The great thing about making these presentations is I'm just giving you my sense of what I think the best practices are.
No, and I appreciate that. So
Yeah, and you get to decide
Yeah.
whether you want to agree with me or not.
Yeah, no, yeah. Don't interpret it as like that. I just, see, where I think at times it's important that we do kind of take on something that is obviously a little bit beyond our city, but it sends a message to the community. It could be violence. It could be, really big stuff that can be thorny, but yet as a collective, we rallied around it.
Okay.
Instead of saying, just don't take everything on.
Well, I think you want to make a value judgment about what you're being asked to do and how does that impact the city, and is it something you all feel as a group makes sense to do?
Thank you.
All right. So policy versus administration operations. You folks are the policymakers. You focus on the what and the why. And the administration, the operations, the staff focus on the how, when, and where. So an example is policy: what will we fund the new highway equipment? The why: is it necessary to service our citizens? Once you've decided you're going to fund the equipment, then the staff determines how it's going to use that equipment, how they might start repairs, how they might fill potholes. So that's kind of the difference between your role as policymakers and the staff role as policy implementers. So your role is, again, related to your overall mission and purpose. And I can't stress enough, you have a terrific strategic plan that's put a lot of good work into that. And I think, especially you new folks, you really should you really should take the time to review and understand what's in there. And as you're making policy decisions, or land use decisions, you should always refer back to either your strategic plan or your comprehensive plan as not necessarily more as a guidepost of where you in the past decided the future should be. That doesn't mean the future always stays the same, right? There's always changes, always things that might override what you've decided, but it all got decided for a reason. So don't let that go by. Again, you're focused on longer term issues. You want to address key issues. And then of course, you want to keep that strategic plan as current as you can. Yes.
I have a question for Brian. Brian, have the new council members received copies of the strategic and comprehensive plans?
Yeah, so as part of kind of the package of information I give all new alders that have started since I've been here, that strategic plan, sustainability plan, kind of all the major plans that we've got
Right.
put in a share folder that is available for all alders.
Thank you so much. Appreciate that.
All right. So on the operations side, the administrator and the staff implement your policies. They're shorter term focused, right? They're trying to get through the year. They're trying to get through the budgets. They're trying to make sure your policies get implemented. They're focused on the day-to-day operations, which typically relates, not always, but usually to smaller versus larger functions. They typically address department and individual issues. They're focused on detail. And the last point I want to make is really important. They typically have specialized training. I've worked with a couple, three of your staff. They all have a lot of training to do their jobs. And I don't want this to sound bad, but what does it take to become an alder? You have to be 18 and live in the district, right? You don't have to have any specialized training. So I'm not saying the staff is always correct in the way it decides to move forward on something, but I would give them a lot of leeway because you hired them because they had that specialized training. So when it comes down, policymaking is the ends where you want to get to, and the administration is the means. And it kills me to use this slide because I grew up in Illinois, so I'm a Bears fan. But all my daughters and my wife are Packers shareholders, so we have that to go by.
Well, it's been great having you. Have a good evening.
People are about everybody getting along in the same channel, right?
Well, it doesn't work all the time. So the Packers have a board of directors, right? But you don't see the board members on the sidelines calling the plays. If you lived in Atlanta, you would, but you see how the Falcons do, so that tells you something. And nor are the board members in the huddle. So keep that in mind. It's kind of a humorous little way to think about it. So now we're going to move on to meetings. And I love this quote from John Kenneth Galbraith, who's a famous economist. Meetings are indispensable when you don't want to do anything. Hopefully that's not your meetings. So what is a meeting? Meeting is a gathering of the members of a governmental body for purposes of exercising its responsibilities. That's right out of the state statutes. So you've got a gathering, which means you all get together. You're a governmental body and you're meeting to exercise your responsibilities. So the intent of the open meetings law is to ensure public access so that your citizens can, in an open meeting, can understand what you're doing, hear what's being discussed, and that your decision-making is open. Your information gathering is done in the open, your discussion is done in the opening, and also most important, your voting is done in the open. And the way the open meeting law works is to advance public, by using advance public notice of meetings that are open and accessible to the public. And you can have closed sessions, but they're limited to statute, what the statute allows. So anytime there's a closed session being proposed, it needs to be on your regular agenda as one. You need to vote to go into closed session, and you need to have the statutory authority part of the motion, which typically is on the agenda as to why you're allowed to go into closed session. So who is covered by the open meetings law? Well, local governing bodies of general and special purpose. So that's you folks, the Common Council. Any committee, commission, or board that you establish is also covered. if you decide to create a special study commission or a special task force to look at a specific problem, and you also involve members of the community as members of that task force, they're also covered by the open meetings law. And the citizen members, even though they're not elected officials, because they've been appointed to a body that you folks created. Now, if the Chamber of Commerce decides it wants to create a task force to study some particular issue and then bring a report to you folks later, and they ask for a couple people to be appointed to that, the chamber is not covered by the open meetings law. So that's the difference. When you create something, the open meeting laws applies. If another community group creates something, unless you have a majority of you folks on that group, in which case the open meeting law applies because of what I'm going to get to next. That is, when do you have a meeting? There's two tests. First, there's the numbers test. Are enough members of the body present to determine outcome of an action? So you've got 3 people sitting at breakfast. I think they're at breakfast. It might be lunch. And they're members of a 5-member committee. So do they meet the numbers test? Yep, because it's 5 and 3. So 3 people can make a decision. But then you have the purpose test. If they can show that their discussion was around how the Brewers are doing, how the Bears are doing better than they ever have, whatever the discussion is, as long as it's not about business under your jurisdiction, the purpose test then defeats the numbers test. So if you have the numbers test met, then there's a presumption a meeting has occurred, and you rebut that presumption by saying, nope, we never discussed anything dealing with the city. We discussed all kinds of other things.
I just want to make a note. If after a council meeting, we all decide to go down to the Village Green for a drink, most often the city administrator has posted that there's a possible quorum. If you can help it, now, if I'm speaking wrong, correct me, but if you can help it, don't be put in the position of having to prove the purpose test. Okay? Don't have a quorum anywhere. People are going to see you and think you're discussing something outside of an open meeting.
The other question we get often is like social gatherings. So there may be, an event, for example, a community event that happens where there might be the opportunity for a quorum of you to randomly show up at the same event. If we know that event is occurring ahead of time and we know that there is a likelihood that a quorum of you will be present, what I like to do is post a notice of quorum, just announcing to the public that there may be a quorum of you at this event, and this event is at this date and time at this place, so that the general public is aware that that might happen. So, if you ever think of a situation where, there might be a social gathering or some other community event where, invitations might go out to all of you, let me know, and then I'll do a notice of quorum to post that.
So the numbers test, by statute, if 1/2 of members of the body are present, there's a presumption the meeting's occurred. So I'm just repeating myself, but that's okay. Hopefully we'll all learn better that way. But if there's a lesser number of members, you might meet the numbers test. So if you have a committee of 5, 2 of you are chatting about the next committee meeting, and one of you isn't going to attend, so now the committee's going to be 4. 2 of you, it's called a negative quorum, can affect action by voting no on something because it takes a majority to pass. So if it's 4 people and it's 2-2, then it fails. So you can affect the action by the committee. So especially for your smaller committees, be really careful about the conversations you have outside of the committee discussions that are in the open, because you might hit the negative quorum test.
And as we did with the presentation that Mr. Foth gave last year on parliamentary procedure, this link will be shared with members of our committee so that they can hear the same information as well as the PowerPoint slides.
Thank you for that.
All right. So we're going to talk real quick about closed sessions. I mentioned it earlier. So you can go into closed session, but only when the statute authorizes the closed session. Again, you have to put it on your agenda for your open meeting. You have to vote to go into closed session. It has to be clear that the closed session has a statutory basis. And I would suggest not making or taking or approving any motions in the closed session. There's nothing wrong with discussing your course of action, but I think if you decide to make a motion, the motion should be made in open session, either after the closed session if the agenda allows it, or at the next meeting. So notice, and this is pretty important because it's pretty hard to have an open meeting to tell the public what they may want to attend if they don't get any real notice of it. So the statute says it has to be at least 24 hours before the meeting or 2 hours if there's good cause. So good cause typically would be there's bad storms, right? Like we've been having, half the city's out of power. You need to have an emergency meeting to figure out what to do. 2-hour notice is perfectly justified. Forgetting to add something to the agenda is not good cause. So if the agenda doesn't have something on it, it's just going to have to wait till the next meeting or reschedule the meeting and get the agenda correct and so that the notice is correct. Also on the notice deadline, if you express the notice in days, all calendar days are counted, excluding the first day and the last day. So if you want to have a meeting on Monday and you express it in days, you can't send the notice out on Friday because, I'm sorry, you could send the notice on Friday because it would include Saturday, but Sundays are not included nor are holidays included. And if expressed in hours, the entire 24 hours of Sunday and any holiday are also excluded.
I have a question for Brian. It used to be that we had to publish it in a newspaper, and I'm not sure we have a lot of active newspapers to put it in now. What do we
Yeah,
do?
the state statute has changed, so there are now options that communities can pick. The one that we chose to do is publish online at our municipal city webpage and post both in publicly conspicuous places. So we post both at the lobby here and on the front window so that anyone, if the building is closed, for example, on the weekends, there's still the opportunity for the public to see the agendas for the upcoming meetings during a weekend.
Perfect, thanks.
I have seen the communications director also post a Facebook post that says upcoming meetings for that link.
I've seen that too.
And I find that that's helpful, even to keep up myself. So hopefully our folks are using social media as well. But I'm glad, I know in the past we didn't always post it to the window up front. And so I appreciate the city's leadership in doing that and implementing it to ensure that we are meeting these guidelines. So thank you to everyone.
And then the other thing I would like to add, and this is more my personal opinion as opposed to, but I also think it's a good practice, is I would post as much notice as you possibly can. 24 hours may seem like a lot of time, but not everybody looks at stuff. So if it's going to be 24, if you're right at the 24 hours or 26 hours, then I would be a little more broad about the net I cast, letting people know when things are going to happen.
That's a good reminder.
So we got a little quiz, mostly just to see if you're all still awake. So got 3 pictures. Is there an open meeting law violation with the first picture, the second picture where the entire common council is in a room, or the third picture where there's just a single person? So how many think picture A, where there were 3 people, there's a possible meeting? How many think picture B, where the whole common council is together in a place? How many think picture C, where one person is sitting in an empty hall? How many think it's all pictures? How many thinks it's none of the pictures? And how many of you need more information? Okay, most of you are listening. Good. What's the more information you need? in all three of in the first two pictures, was there any business of the municipality being discussed? You can all be at a concert together, enjoying Lion King or what have you. You can be all eating breakfast together, enjoying a good meal and just bonding. As long as you don't stray into discussing municipal business. Now, for the person sitting by themselves, one person sitting by themselves is never a meeting. Because one person sitting by themselves can never make anything happen, right? Okay, we also have some special cases. I love this cartoon. All those in favor of what we discussed in our email thread and Larry's son's party, say aye. And of course, the public goes, I thought this meeting was open. What's going on? So one thing that happens, or potentially can happen, is a walking quorum. That's where either through a series of phone calls, emails, conversations, you meet with each of your committee members, each of your common council members separately to have a discussion about the item coming before the common council. The minute you hit 4, you have violated the open meetings law. And if your committees are 5 or less, then 2 or 3 might create a violation. So the key is, first of all, if you get an email about something and it's sent to the entire common council, do not reply all. Reply back to the clerk or administrator, whoever sent the email, and ask them, hey, I got a question about this. Because the clerk and the administrator are not subject to the open meetings law. So they can respond back to all of you with, hey, we got a question on this. Here's the answer. And again, really think in terms of I know it's hard not to want to talk to other folks and figure out where everybody's at before the meeting. But the whole intent of the open meetings law, good, bad, or indifferent, was those conversations should be happening in an open forum. So now we're going to move to meeting rules.
Excuse me.
Yes.
Is there such a thing as a negative walking quorum?
Yeah. And that's why I said the minute you hit 4, that could be a negative quorum.
What if you have a council of 8 and our quorum is 6?
Right. Because you're 2/3. Yep.
Yep. So would 3 be a negative walking quorum?
Yes.
6.
So I think the simple thing to think about is just avoid having those conversations when you can. I know it's tempting to have those conversations, but try to avoid them and then you'll never have any issues. So now we're going to move to meeting rules. Lots of different sources. You folks have, as I mentioned, your meeting rules, which, and these 3 areas cover sort of when your time and date is, who the presiding officer is, and some general rules, which basically says you're going to follow Robert's rules so far as it is not inconsistent with state statute, U.S. Constitution, state constitution, or your own meeting rules. So in that hierarchy, Roberts is last, just to keep that in mind. So the reason we have Robert's rules is to facilitate discussion, not to obstruct it. Although I know there's a couple books out there about using Roberts and for guerrilla meetings or something, kind of a guerrilla warfare using Roberts. It's intended to be fair to all, but the majority should eventually rule. And it should provide order. Now there's 2 books here. The white book on top is the Roberts book. It's about that thick. It's in about 9-point type. And it's, there we go. It's written in extremely archaic language. Somebody stole my copy, so I'm gonna have to go get another one now. But however, the book I think you should have, if you don't, is the yellow one. Well, thank you. The yellow book is also written by the Roberts folks, but it's written in plain English. It's very easy to understand. It should cover about 95% of any issues you'll ever have from a parliamentary procedure standpoint. And the best part is, if you want to do a deeper dive, it references back to the big Roberts. So if you don't have the book, I highly recommend you get it. It's like, well, it used to be like $5.
The city administrator provided a set.
Oh, well, there you go. He's so good.
This set was
You're
from
buying all
me,
these
so
books?
you're good to go. It's not from the city, it's from me.
Okay, so now we're going to talk about the making motions and what the motion procedure is. A motion's a formal proposal by a member of the body in a meeting that the body takes certain action. That's right out of Roberts. Motions are required for substantive issues. You should avoid negative motion. So what's a negative motion? Someone makes a motion not to send the mayor to the League of Cities annual conference. Motion fails. Does the mayor still get to go? I don't know. So that's a negative motion where the outcome is not clear. When you make a motion, the outcome should be clear. What happens if it passes and what happens if it fails? The motion should be fully stated and then repeated by the chair when seconded, and it must be seconded. In fact, state law requires seconds to motions. So keep that in mind. So motions. Oh, I just went through all this, didn't I? There we go. So the main motion starts the discussion, and we're going to walk through the whole motion process, but you can only have one main motion on the floor at any one time. Then there's other classes of motions, privilege motions, which relate to the meeting, subsidiary motions relate to the treatment of the main motion, and incidental motions, which relate to the conduct of the meeting. And we'll talk about those quickly. So it starts out with the main motion, and I love this cartoon. This meeting was called in order to discuss the meat. It's been pointed out there's no more meat. A motion's been made to fight over the bones. So hopefully you don't have that. So main motion is very simple. I move that. And it should be short and simple, but enough language so people understand what you're moving. It should not be a 10-minute soliloquy about why it's the greatest idea since sliced bread. It should just be short and sweet and to the point. Save your discussion about the wisdom of the motion for the motion discussion. So for privilege motions, typically require immediate action. So call for orders. So if somehow the mayor at the regular common council meeting gets, moves from agenda item 2 to agenda item 5, you say point of order, Madam Mayor, we should be moving to item 3. And the mayor goes, oh, you're right. And then goes back to it. So that's a simple way to look at that. Also, if you want to recess, you need to get a Snicker bar or a bathroom break and adjourning. Subsidiary motions relate to the treatment of main motions, typically amendments, postponing, referring to committees, etc. I'll get through all these here. Note in subsidiary motions that if you want to close discussion, or if you want to extend debate beyond what your rules allow or what Roberts allows, which I'll talk about in a minute, that requires a 2/3 vote. And then on incidental motions, this is usually used where, again, a point of order. If you have specific rules about how motions can be withdrawn, so those supersede Roberts. Appealing the decision of the chair, suspending the rules, or you may have a motion that's complex. It's got many parts to it. So you may want to just break that motion into its smaller parts so it's easier to discuss and easier to understand. So there is a order of proceedings, which basically tells you how the meeting should be run. And I'll go through an example of that here momentarily. So let's get to the motions live. Whoops. So motions live start to finish. It starts with obtaining the floor. Typically do it here by raising hand, or then you have to wait to be recognized. Just raising your hand and starting talking isn't enough. You need to be recognized by the chair. Then you'll make your motion. Someone will second your motion. The chair will restate the motion. And that's done for 2 reasons. One, so everybody is clear what the motion is. And secondly, so the clerk can get the motion correctly recorded in the minutes. Then you discuss, then you put to a vote, you vote, and the result is announced. Pretty simple, right?
And I want to say I'm sorry. You had your hand.
Oh, go ahead.
I was going to say, with this council and even the last one, after your training, people did a really good job of waiting to be called on. I didn't even let you call on me, I'm sorry. But
Everybody but you, I guess,
Bef-
huh?
right. I'm just saying, like, maybe 3-4 years ago sometimes, so this is before most of your time, we would get a council that was just talking back and forth and just, they were so impassioned. And suddenly it was just back and forth and answering each other's questions, and the energy was great. But I want to say thank you to everyone who really is following these Roberts rules. And I've seen that difference in how respectful you are. Even our 2 new councilmen are stepping in line, so it's pretty cool.
All right, so, I'm sorry, question.
Yes, I just wondered, so you said, can you go back to the slide you showed the cheat sheet?
Yeah,
You had said that under state law, all motions require a second. So even the ones on this page where it says no in the second column, we still have to get a second?
no, because
Okay.
those aren't main motions. Those are subsidiary, incidental, or privileged.
Okay. Okay.
And one of the reasons Roberts created this chart was so it made it easier to understand when you have a second, when you don't, whether the motion, the item, the way the motion is made. So for example, closing the meeting, which is at the top of the list, no debate, no amendments, and requires a majority vote. So again, you want to make positive motions, not negative motions, where it's clear, voting yes or voting no, what that means. And the motion should have a brief description of what you're talking about, but again, not an argument or an impassioned discussion about why it's the greatest motion in the entire world. Then the motion gets seconded, and this is really important. All the second does is somebody else thinks your motion is worthy of discussion. It doesn't mean they have to support your motion. It doesn't mean they even like your motion. Lots of times folks will second a motion just to get on the floor so they can kill it. So keep that in mind, that just because someone seconds the motion doesn't necessarily mean they're in favor of the motion. You definitely want the second to happen. So in committee meetings where you're a lot more informal, it's not unusual to have all kinds of discussion before you even get to a motion. And really that makes sense, right? Because the whole purpose of the committee meeting is to hash out different ways, have a good discussion about how to get something done. And if you waited for a motion, you wouldn't necessarily have that good discussion. So it's not unusual in committee meetings to do all the discussion, then have the motion, then have the second, then go through the voting. But for formal council meetings, you really should follow the agenda. The motion should be first, the second. In other words, you should follow this procedure. So, and if you're discussing something fairly substantive that's getting a lot of community interest, you may decide in a committee meeting you want to be more formal. It's really up to you at the committee meeting level. So under Roberts, and this usually happens at the committee meetings, but if it's clear there's been a lot of discussion about the motion, it may not need a second because again, the second was to show the motion is worthy of discussion. If you already had a lot of discussion, then so at committee meetings, it isn't necessarily that important to have a second, but I think it's a good practice, especially since state law requires it. Now, if you second a motion and then you decide, you know what, I don't want to second this motion. Once the chair restates the motion belongs to the body, and the maker of the motion and the person who seconded the motion can no longer impact what happens with the motion. That's up to you folks as the body. So the chair restates the motion, it's been moved and seconded. Again, now the body has the motion. So that means whoever made the motion, whoever seconded the motion can only withdraw the motion by formally making a new motion with that same seconding, and that's under your rules. Oops. And again, this just reiterates what I just said about withdrawing a motion. And your rules are no motion can be amended or withdrawn without consent of the alderperson making the same and the alderperson seconding. So your rules change Roberts in terms of what Roberts proposes. So under Roberts, they talk about debate. I like to use the word discuss because in my mind, debate indicates winners and losers, whereas discussion indicates folks trying to get to a good resolution or solution. So you have the discussion to fine tune the motion. As I mentioned, it could happen prior to the motion. Typically that happens in committees. And even if you have plenty of discussion before the motion's made, after the motion's made and seconded, restated by the chair should always make sure that anyone else that wants to have more discussion is provided that opportunity. So you might discuss amendments. So amending is not a substitution motion. In other words, you wipe out the whole motion through the amendment. Amendment is intended to make the motion better or to adjust the motion in some form. Main motions can be amended, but the amendment must be germane. So if you're talking about land use and someone wants to make an amendment to buy the administrator a new Buick, that's probably not germane to land use, but still probably a good idea. Yeah, I know. That's why I said it. Amendments require a motion.
Sorry, can I put a finer point in that too? So for example, if you make one motion, to use your example of land use, giving one address, you can't strike that address and add a completely different address. That would not be germane. So it has to be the topic that was part of the original main motion. You can't change the overall intent of that motion to talk about a completely different subject, if that makes sense.
So amendments require the motion stay in the amendment, a second and a vote. Amendments always take precedence over the main motion, and we'll show that in a minute. And there's no such thing as a friendly amendment. I don't know if any of you have been involved in nonprofits where someone makes a motion and you say, I'd like to make a friendly amendment. There is no such thing as friendly amendments. We have a great video on our website that if you want to learn more about that, you can. But basically, it's either amendment or it's not. There's nothing friendly or unfriendly about it. So amendments are debatable. And amendments are amendable. So you can have an amendment to the motion and an amendment to the amendment. But I strongly suggest if you're chairing the meeting to keep the amendments to the amendments down to one at a time. Now, if somebody else wants to make a separate amendment to the amendment, tell them to wait until you deal with the first amendment to the amendment. Otherwise, you'll all get lost. And I'm almost lost just even talking about it. And then once you're done with talking about the amendment, you can bring it up. Once you've dealt with all the amendments to the amendment, then you would deal with the amendment. And again, once it's voted on, it's settled. So if you decide someone wants to buy the entire staff iPads and that's voted down, then someone makes a motion, same person who made the iPad motion, well, now I want to buy everybody an electronic device. The chair should find that out of order because that motion's already been decided. There's precious little difference between an iPad and an electronic device usually. So trying to dress it up as a different same item, but in a different way doesn't cut it. Just as if you were going to buy the public works director a new truck and then that's voted down. So then you make a motion to buy the public works director a red truck. A truck's a truck. So sometimes as you're talking through a motion, it's clear it should be referred to a committee. So then someone can make a motion to refer the matter to a standing or special committee. That motion is amendable. Typically, when you make a motion to send something to committee, part of that motion includes when you want to hear back from the committee. So make a motion to send this to the Public Works Committee. I would like them to come back at our next meeting. And then if one of you's on the Public Works Committee, you might say, well, we're not meeting for 2 months. Can this wait? You know, you could have that discussion, but typically you have a time certain. That way everybody knows when it's coming back.
Just
Oh,
a question.
yes.
If we're in a main motion and the motion is then we do a secondary motion to refer to committee, what does that do to the need to vote or not vote? Or how does that close off?
Once you vote to send it to committee, it goes to the committee.
Okay,
You don't.
but is that item off the table
The
then?
item's off the table until the committee comes back with its report. Or advice or suggestion or new motion or whatever it is. So postponing and tabling is probably the most misunderstood thing, partly because of C-SPAN. So when you see the Congress table something, that they operate under their own rules of parliamentary procedure. It has nothing to do with Roberts. When they table something, it's dead. It's gone forever. When you're thinking about wanting to table something, you should think about it in this way. So you might have a meeting and you have some person of expertise coming before the council to give you a report, and they're item 7 on the agenda, and they show up early, and you're paying them $200 an hour. You might want to move up the time for them to talk. So you might table the item currently under discussion to bring it up in the same meeting after the expert has given their presentation. So that's a typical example of tabling. If you table a motion and it doesn't come up again in the same meeting, the only way to bring it off the table is to make a motion to bring it off the table with a second and passing. So if you're the chair, you should understand, are you just trying to, whoever is making the motion table, do they want to table, which means let's talk about it later in the meeting? Do they want to postpone it to a later date, which means you'll talk about it at a future meeting? Or do they want to postpone indefinitely, which means it's dead? So keep that in mind. If someone wants to table something in a committee meeting, if you're chairing the committee or if you're chairing the, if you're acting as chair, find out what the member's intent is so that it's clear to everybody. If they vote yes or no on the matter, the tabling, they know what it is happening. Yes.
No, go ahead, please.
Okay, I have an actual situation, but I'll try to make it hypothetical. Let's say you have a committee and they're considering some action that really would be better informed if it waited until a crucial piece of information is available, say a year from now, and we know it's going to be a year from now. Members move to table the action until that crucial piece of information is available, and that motion passed. Later, the same committee brought it back up because they were under the impression that to even talk at all about what might we do when we get that piece of information, to have any conversation about this potential action would not be possible since it had been tabled. And instead, they had to bring it up to be, I can't remember how they phrased it, if it was just postponed until a certain time. But if something is tabled at a meeting, can someone bring it back for discussion and still not act on it until that later date when the crucial piece of information is available?
So I think that if you're chairing the meeting, then I would get the committee's wishes. Does the committee wish to have this discussion, or would we prefer to wait until a formal motion is back before us? If the committee decides, yeah, let's have the discussion, then have at it. If the committee decides, no, we just moved it, we just made a motion to send it to the future, we'll have that discussion in the future.
As an addendum to that hypothetical, if the chair quoted Robert's rules that tabling automatically untables after 2 meetings, for which I've never seen that Robert's rules, although perhaps it's in the book, how do we ensure that our chairs are comfortable with tabling? And is that accurate about the untabling automatically?
I've never seen that in Roberts. That's not to say it's not hidden in here somewhere, but typically under Roberts, if you table a motion, it has to have a motion to bring it back off the table in a second discussion vote.
Thank you.
Now, I have seen some local rules that allow that, but I don't think it's in Roberts. But you've asked some neat questions, so I'm going to do some homework on that.
He had his hand up, sorry.
Did he have his hand up? I have one question, well, maybe not. To Alder Herniro, was in your hypothetical, was the committee wanting to discuss the tabled item within the same meeting?
No. They did not want it,
And-
and Alder Jackson does now have his hand raised.
I understand,
He might be.
and I'll get there.
Okay.
But then that item has to be on the agenda or it can't be discussed, correct?
Yes.
Okay. And I know that we use the word defer quite often in our meetings when we mean that we would like this to not be discussed at this meeting, but at a future meeting. Does that muck anything up in your mind?
Well,
Or postpone.
I mean, basically, that's just a motion to postpone the
Mhm.
item to the next meeting.
Right. Right, okay. Alder Jackson, did you have a question or comment?
Yes, I'm just piggybacking on the same thing, that the question that comes up hypothetically. If a motion went out to table an item, and in that motion, it said to table it until a certain event took place or until a certain document came forth, and it was voted on, and I believe it was 3-2, and the 3 was in favor of tabling it until that document came up. If correct me if I'm wrong, is it not supposed to be tabled because the body agreed that it'll be tabled until a certain document came up?
Well, I think the hypothetical was more about, can we have more discussion around what might happen when this event occurs? And that's why I said if I was chairing the committee, what I would do is get the wish of the committee. You know, do they want to have this discussion or they want to wait until? Under Roberts, you would typically wait until the event occurred and then have that discussion.
And I also know that you mentioned if it was tabled, I think you said it can be like questioned or whatever. Is that supposed to be at the same time it was tabled, or can it be brought up in another meeting, added on the agenda to talk about an item that was already tabled in a meeting and it really wasn't opposed at the current meeting?
So if it's on the agenda to bring it off the table, which I think is what you're asking, then it would require a motion to bring it off the table, second, discussion, vote.
Okay, thank you.
Mayor.
The one thing I want to point out is that there was a piece on the discussion and the opportunity to have a discussion. However, there was an impetus to make the committee members concerned, in my best opinion, that the untabling would occur automatically and then any discussion could occur at any time. And so to untable it, it was to be voted on to postpone it to allow things. So the reason that I share that is that a reason to untable was given that I feel was inaccurate. And pushed or coerced the committee to make a decision in rush judgment. And that is a concerning thing to me.
So when you're chairing a committee, part of your duty as chair is to run the meeting.
Yep.
If something like this occurs, you as chair should decide, am I going to allow this or not? And if the chair decides to allow it, one of you thinks, no, we shouldn't allow this, you should make a point of order that the chair has made an incorrect ruling, and then the committee would have to vote that way also.
That's a good point, because we have to be wholly aware of our responsibilities and our rules. And I'm so glad we constantly learn and are curious and learn our rights, so that if it happens in the future, We will know what this says. So thank you.
All right, let's do a little exercise with the order of proceedings chart. Oops. So we got a scenario. Member A makes a motion to buy a new computer for the clerk. Member D seconds. Member C thinks the entire city staff needs a new computer and moves to amend the motion accordingly. Member D seconds. Starting to see a pattern with member D. Member B thinks the issue needs further review and moves to refer to the finance committee. Member D seconds. Member E needs a bathroom break, wants to think about all of this. So moves to take a break, and member D seconds. So using the order of proceedings, first we have the main motion. And if you notice, it's the bottom of the chart, which means everything that happened after that takes precedence over the main motion. The main motion is always in the lowest order of proceedings. Then you have the amendment, which is 2 steps above. So what that tells you is we've got to deal with the amendment before we can deal with the main motion. Oops. Oop, I went too fast. Then we had the refer to committee, which is a step above amending. So that has to happen before the amendment. And then we have, oop, I keep going the wrong way, sorry. Then we have taking a break. So now we got all 4 on the floor. So if you're chairing the meeting, you can use the order of proceedings chart to help you decide how you handle each of these areas. So first you take a break, right? Because it's the highest order of proceedings. And then it's the 2 should be down by the number 13. Sorry about that. Then you refer to the committee is the next one because it's the next order. Then the amendment is the next one.
But that's only if the reference to committee fails, correct?
Correct. Yeah. So I'm going to go through that here in a minute. So here's how the chair handles it. Take a break. That passes. 10-minute break. Takes up the next motion, refer to the finance committee because it has the next order of proceedings, but that fails. Then it takes up the motion to amend the motion, which is buy everybody a computer. That passes. Now what happens?
You vote on them.
You still have to vote on the main motion, correct? Because if you don't vote on the main motion, you've done nothing but had an interesting conversation. So even if the amendment to the main motion effectively changes the main motion, you still have to vote on the main motion as amended. So basically you would, in this case, have 2 votes on the same thing. But if the amendment to buy everybody a computer failed, you would still vote on the main motion, which is to buy a computer for the clerk. So that's the way you can use the order of proceedings chart.
And if he says that if 2 fails, if 2 passes, which is to refer to committee, the other 2 you simply.
Yes, once the motion passes, refer to committee, bang, that's where it goes. All right, I'm going to do couple quick slides on some side trips. Again, the chair guides the discussion. The chair may comment or amend the motion, but if the chair takes an active advocacy in favor or against the motion, the chair should step down and the next person in line should run the meeting because the chair should be viewed as a non-advocate by everybody because otherwise, how would you know the chair is running the meeting fairly if they don't step down? Again, focus on discussion, problem solving, listening to understand, and again, facts should be important. And I think the other thing is really important is to respect each other. You all have different viewpoints about how the world should operate. And I think it's important that if you respect everyone else's view, they will respect your views. At least I hope that's the way it works.
Can I ask a question
Yeah.
about the chairing? So does that apply to committees as well? Because
Yes.
in some committees, we have very strong chairs who,
So if the chair decides to make a motion, the chair should turn the gavel over to the vice chair.
okay, but the chair can engage in the discussion if others have made the motion.
Yeah, but if the chair decides to be an advocate for or against the motion, I think the best practice is to turn the gavel over to the vice chair.
Hmm.
What if the vice chair doesn't, wants to be an advocate? I'm wondering, I'm
Well,
looking at you two only
you-
because this would be your situation perhaps if the chair wanted to be engaged in the discussion and didn't want the vice chair to be engaged. Do you see what I mean? Isn't that kind of a power play to be like, I'm going to advocate, so now you have to take on the role of chair? And
Well, the vice
be
chair
neutral.
could say, no, I want to be an advocate also. And then you could wind down with the fifth member of the committee running the meeting. So,
And I'm not saying that would ever happen, but I saw that right away, was like, ooh, that could be useful.
Yeah.
We do have
That's how your chess mind works.
strong thoughts, so I'll make sure I keep my strong thoughts quiet.
and I think again, the other important thing to remember with committees is you're trying to have a good discussion so you can get the right resolution.
Right.
So the chair only steps down once the motion's made and the chair decides they want to advocate. If the committee has discussion before the motion's even made, there's nothing to advocate for.
Sure.
They're just expressing
Okay,
opinions.
that makes sense.
So I think that's an important thing to remember, especially at the committee level.
It's good to know.
But it becomes a point of order as to how to make sure that the chair is where they're supposed to set it down.
So if you feel the chair's become an advocate, you certainly can make that point of order.
Hmm.
So again, if you're chairing, you're responsible for administrating the body's action deliberations. You want to make sure you get a balanced participation. A good way to do that is if you know there's people on both sides of the motion, call on, obviously the person who made the motion should talk about why they think it's a good idea. Then the chair should recognize someone who's against the motion and go back and forth. And then you may have a situation where a couple, three people haven't spoken for whatever reason. Maybe they're still making up their minds. The chair should always make sure that those people had the opportunity to speak. Doesn't mean they have to speak. Doesn't mean they want to speak. Doesn't mean they're going to speak. Just means they had the opportunity.
I have a question. So when I chair council, I don't know how people are thinking. How do if I'm trying to do this balanced approach of pro con topics, like say something very passionate is in front of us, and how do you know, or do you ask a different question? Like people raise their hand if they want to speak.
Yeah, so you're going to have some people that are going to volunteer.
Mhm.
The key thing, so you may not know if anybody's in favor or against the motion.
That has happened.
So then I would
yes.
just so what I would say is someone speaks and then you might say, does someone have a different point of view? As a way to get to that
Back and
question.
forth.
Yep.
Okay, that's good.
Yep.
That's good. to know.
And it could be that everyone's still trying to learn about it, which may mean it's a good time to refer to a committee. So. All right. And then under Robert's rules, any member can speak up to 10 minutes twice on any issue. So think about some of your meetings, you're all speaking for 20 minutes. That's a long meeting. So you may want to consider in your rules, limiting debate to 2 minutes or 3 minutes. I think twice per topic is probably a good idea because sometimes stuff comes up you didn't even think about and you want to respond. But if you can't say what you need to say, in my experience, most places, you can say what you need to say in 2 minutes, 3 minutes max. So that's just a thought. All right, so you've had this big discussion. Now where do you go? So the chair can say, wants to, it's pretty clear that everyone's talked. So the chair can say any further discussion. If nobody nods their head, the chair now has unanimous consent to move to voting. There's some other points the other chair could say. My favorite one is any new points before we vote, because sometimes I'm sure you've all seen it. Arguments get repeated. But the chair can't decide on their own to end discussion. Without a motion to end discussion, then that requires 2/3 vote to pass. So then, before the vote, the chair restates the motion. and the effect of a yes or no vote. If you vote yes, this happens. If you vote no, this doesn't happen, or this, here's the other option. Typically, there's a lot of fun ways to vote. Ayes and nays are usual, or very common. Show of hands is common. However, if you use any method besides a roll call vote and one of you decide you want to put everybody on the record as to how they're voting, you may request under state law a roll call vote, and a roll call vote has to happen. There's some other items of voting. You have to have a quorum. So if there aren't 6 of you here, you can't do your business. Unless you have a roll call vote, you don't have any record for anybody abstaining unless someone wants to vocally say they abstain. The city of Madison had a rule that all their alders had to vote, and one alder decided not to vote on something and got fined under the city ordinance. And he went to federal court, and the federal court said, no, you all have a First Amendment right to vote or not to vote. So you can't pass a rule that says you all have to vote. But I would remind you that you're all elected to move the city forward, and voting is the way to do it. So unless you absolutely positively can't vote, I strongly suggest you do. And then, of course, the mayor breaks any ties. So if you have a potential conflict of interest, my suggestion is you remove yourself from participation or voting. Now, the League of Wisconsin Municipalities had this approach for a long time. The Ethics Commission, State Ethics Commission said, no, you don't have to remove yourself. You can just go sit in the audience. Well, in my mind, your body language can be as strong as any words that you have. So to me, I think the Ethics Commission missed the boat on that one. I think it makes more sense that if you have a conflict, to up and leave the room so nobody can ever say you influence the vote in any way, shape, or form. You also don't have to disclose. So what you might want to do is just tell the chair that you have to leave and you'll come back after the motion's made. You can also disclose your conflict. It's up to you. But when you leave the room, you're treated as absent. So if there's 6 of you here and you leave the room, now there's 5, you can't do any business. So you might not even be able to take that motion up until such time where there's a quorum.
Yeah.
Mr. Yeah, go ahead.
In that case, could a member who has a conflict of interest just abstain?
The trouble with abstaining is again, your body language may show some things. That's why I think you should leave the room. At the very least, lead the body and sit in the audience. But I think the best thing is to leave the room. And if it makes a mess with the quorum, it makes a mess with the quorum.
Okay.
And then does the person who has the conflict participate in the vote to postpone?
No, they should not participate,
So you
period.
can't even vote to postpone.
Well, you don't
There's
need to
no
vote to
quorum.
postpone. Once you lose a quorum, you can't do any more business. So if the member can come back and you can do other agenda items, you could go out and get them, and basically that item would be effectively tabled to the next meeting, because
It's just
you-
understood that that's tabled to the next meeting.
not necessarily. If you don't have a quorum, it doesn't vote. So you would have to put it on the,
Because of that person's potential conflict, they wouldn't be able to vote to postpone it to a future meeting.
correct.
Best practice, so.
But you lose your forum, so therefore you can't have a vote. to
I understand
postpone it.
Yeah.
that, but then does it automatically make it onto the next agenda?
I think it only goes on the next agenda if you decide to put it on the next agenda by whoever decides the agendas.
Just hanging in the universe without, okay.
So abstentions, I suggest you vote present so you don't have these sticky little quorum issues. But remember that your citizens voted you to make decisions, so keep that in mind. Then you announce the result. Presiding officer, motion carried or failed. And if you know the number of votes on each side, state those. So now we're going to talk a little bit about points of order. The mayor or the chair decides according to your rules. You would point out the discrepancy in the meeting rules, but it needs to happen when the infraction happens. You can't think about it and bring it up at the next council meeting and say, hey, or next committee meeting, hey, I think we did this wrong. That's, your time has passed. And then you state the reason for the point of order. I make a point of order, the chair's off the agenda. We've already discussed this, this should be ruled as non-germane, whatever your point of order is. Then the chair decides it's, whether it agrees or disagrees with the point of order. So if the chair disagrees with the point of order, you can appeal the point of order. Now, you don't do this by throwing eggs. Although at this picture I like because, first of all, you wonder, this was Ukrainian parliament about 10 years ago. They were smart enough to bring an umbrella, but they weren't good enough to keep the egg off them anyway. So the member says, I appeal the chair decision. Then the chair says the decision the chair is appealed, and the chair states the exact question at issue and why the chair decided to deny the point of order. And then the vote is, do you sustain the chair's decision? And then you all vote. So when I first saw this picture, I thought it was Bob Dylan, but it turns out it's John Lennon. But I liked his comment, which is trying to please everybody is impossible. If you did that, you'd end up in the middle with nobody liking you. You just got to make a decision about what you think is best and do it. We have a ton of resources, which are in your slides. And then I also want to mention quickly that I'm also director of the Certified Public Manager Program. Brian is one of our instructors and has been a great asset to our program. And our next cohort starts in October. And you folks in the past have sent folks, and I'm hoping you'll consider it again for this coming October. It's probably as good a leadership, executive management for your staff as exists anywhere.
Wonderful. Does anyone else have any questions for Mr. Foe? I want to thank you for coming in. I really appreciate it.
I'm just Robert's rules saying, sorry.
I'll take a listen and get back with you. Is that okay?
And just one reminder for the group, you all as your membership, as the committee do receive the monthly magazine from the League of Wisconsin Municipalities, called The Municipalities, the name of the magazine. This works out perfectly. This month edition for June, a lot of the initial material in this edition reinforces a lot of what Dan's talked about. So a lot of the same topics we talked about in terms of roles and responsibilities of council versus other individuals in the format of local government. And then they always have like a monthly Robert's Rules of Order, Parliamentary Procedure topic that they talk about. So this month in particular, if it's in your mailbox now, I'd grab it and kind of read over the first couple of articles because they reinforce a lot of the stuff that Dan's talked about tonight.
Thank you. Mine just arrived today, so look for it. Excellent. Thanks again.
Thank you all.
Thank you.
Appreciate
Thank
it.
you.
Have a good night. We're glad to not be sending you out into another storm.
Breathe when you go outside.
All right. Moving on to our next discussion item, let's go to the update and discussion on Civic Campus Project. And I believe that we've got some staff to help us out with that tonight. So thanks for staying, anyone who's helping with this.
Yes, thank you. Happy to be here to give you kind of an update. Just give me a second to get this going. Okay, have Abby join me here this evening. What we wanted to do is just give you kind of a brief update on where we are at with the campus community plan, and also kind of preview some of the discussion we'd like the council to have as part of our meeting next week, Tuesday, June 4th. We will have an agenda item related to the expanded scope of work that we are looking for council's permission and authorization to proceed with some additional background work and analysis that we need our architectural consultants to do to help get the council to a point where they feel ready to start making some pretty substantive decisions on which direction to take this project. If you will recall, just in brief, a lot of this work initially started era obviously was put on pause during the pandemic. And since we've come out of the pandemic, the council has indicated a desire to bring this topic back up for conversation and kind of reanalysis of what were the options that were presented in the 2019 timeframe. Are our assumptions the same today as they were in 2019? And actually ask some questions that we hadn't originally considered in 2019 in terms of, there are some new build options, but also can we and should we consider substantial retrofit of the 3 buildings as they sit today? And what does that look like? What are the requirements for that? What are the costs associated with that? So that the council can then weigh those 2 options and any sort of hybrid option, in terms of what makes the most sense from a number of different perspectives, and then provide some direction on where we'd want to go for larger community conversation, potential referendum, those things going forward. So what we will be looking for discussion next week, Tuesday, is authorization of this expanded scope of work. But we'd like just to kind of give you a high-level overview of where we're at today, answer any initial questions, and then continue that discussion next week, Tuesday.
It's not sharing.
Yeah.
All right. So as Brian said, this is probably a refresh for many of you. It might be new for a couple of our newer council members. Just to bring you all kind of back up to speed and on the same page. In 2019, the City Council approved funding for a community campus plan looking at the land that the city owns in downtown Middleton. The community campus plan had 6 main goals. You can see in red that those goals have been more recently updated, but generally the goals are to identify opportunities to modernize and or replace the city's current public facilities where needed and appropriate, look at opportunities for more efficient use of land, potentially through combined facilities, more flexible spaces, looking at opportunities for underground parking. We have a lot of surface parking right now in our downtown, which isn't a typical land use that we want to promote in downtown Middleton. We also want to ensure that our municipal facility space needs are met and can accommodate future growth of the city. We wanted to look at opportunities for private development or public-private partnerships and possibly looking at mixed-use development. And then looking at enhancing downtown Middleton by creating concepts for municipal buildings that will be more customer-friendly, more functional, and visually appealing. And then number 6 is to align with the city's approved sustainability goals for the civic campus. So that is one step that the council has approved is we have a detailed scope for the goals that we want to meet with any new buildings in downtown. If you go to the next slide. Oh, sorry. Okay. So this map here outlined in blue, you can see the land that we're looking at. It is the existing senior center, the parking lot between the senior center and City Hall. The green box is a small site that the city purchased a number of years ago from Middleton Outreach Ministry when they moved to Parmenter Street, and that was just to provide flexibility for future growth needs for city buildings. We also have included the public library, the parking lot that is accessed off Hubbard Avenue next to the public library, as well as the parking lot that is behind the library on Terrace Avenue. And you can see that the historic train depot is also included, but that has really not been a focus area because that is a nationally designated landmark, so we wouldn't really anticipate any changes to that building. One of the things that the council was really wanted us to consider is that the plan should really look at the larger context of the downtown and also the city as a whole when we're moving this forward. Oops, wrong way. Okay. We have selected a consulting team with consultants from SEH, Epstein Ewan, as well as Findorf for this project. So they're architects, engineers, as well as project managers for construction projects. The city also formed a community campus committee. It's a 9-member committee. And the biggest change that we've made recently to this committee makeup is that we have removed city staff members as voting members. That was something that was kind of a little odd about the structure of the committee because it's not typical for a city staff member to vote on a body that is advising the council. So the current makeup of the committee is our common council appointment, which is Katie Nelson, our plan commission appointment, Aaron Summers, the Parks Board appointed Erica Pollock, Library Board appointed Jean Phillips, the Commission on Aging appointed Ken Markhart, our Chamber of Commerce representative is its director, Kate Miller, and then we have 3 mayoral appointments from differing aldermanic districts, Justin Ballweg, Jennifer Cole, and then we have 1 seat that is currently vacant. The original scope of work for the community campus plan was a 2-part scope. The first phase or part was to identify the space needs. So that was basically looking at the programming functions of all of the aspects of the city departments within these buildings and what needs we could identify and what that meant in terms of square footage for building space needs. And we did that through a number of things. We had what we called an all our ideas survey, and that was an opportunity for us to propose things that people might have wanted to see in the new community campus plan, as well as to open it up online for community members to suggest ideas, and then people could vote them up or down depending on the prioritization that they placed on the ideas that we put forward. We also did data gathering and analyzing, looking at the breakdown of our current municipal facilities, the square footage that's devoted to office space versus programmable space, kitchen space, et cetera. We had a Sunday stroll, which was just an opportunity where we actually pulled a wagon around downtown Middleton, as well as Lakeview Park, and we asked people to put any idea on this board that you can see. And those ideas were all considered as well. And then we had stakeholder meetings where we brought in specific user groups that had a stake in downtown, for example, the Plan Commission, the Downtown Business Association, and we allowed them to share their thoughts. At the end of phase 1, our consultants had estimated that we needed between 154,000 and 180,000 square feet of building space to accommodate the needs that they had identified. That was a range, and the council did not ever approve that square footage that was proposed. The second phase of the initial scope was public input, programming, concept design, and then developing cost estimates. One of the things I want to make sure it's very clear is that this plan will not get us a designed building. This plan does not include architecture and engineering services for exactly all of the details for what a new or a rehabilitated facility would look like. This plan would allow the council to make an informed decision about what the needs are for our municipal facilities, put the prioritization together, select the concept that we want to put forward, and then we would have a cost estimate that would go along with that, but it would be a next step for the city to decide to actually design and construct a new facility. So you can see the level of detail that we might expect coming out of a final plan. These are three options that had been provided by our consultants, and I don't want to go over them in detail because what we're talking about today is the expanded scope of work. These are likely to change, but I will just kind of roughly describe these. You can see on the screen here, this concept is called the hub. It is really trying to consolidate most of the city functions into one or two connected buildings, which are shown in this image on the library site as well as the library parking lot. Yellow indicates library, blue is city hall. There was a concept that was discussed quite a bit called an intergenerational center. The idea behind that was combining the senior center with a new community center. We did get a lot of feedback from our seniors as well as our Commission on Aging that they really wanted to have a dedicated separate space for the seniors. So that's one thing that we still will need to work towards, and we have kind of fleshed that out in the expanded scope of work. The transparent boxes that are shown are spaces that would be available for some other type of use. So it may not be a city building. It could be affordable housing. It could be a community land trust site. It could be private development of some type. But in this concept, it's showing those as open for some other type of use to be determined. And we really want to make sure that the city focuses on what our municipal needs are first, and then figure out, what to do with what remains as a second step. But, yeah, go ahead.
Cartography. It's the first time I've seen the city looking south. Yeah, I spent 10 minutes trying to get the gist of the gate.
The orientation.
Busting all across University Avenue. I've never seen one of them. So
Yeah, you can
looking south.
you can orient yourself with Hubbard Avenue Diner. You can kind of see like the curvature on the east side of the building there. So this is a very similar concept. Really the primary difference with this concept, which was called the Helm, is that it provides at grade under building parking. So rather than just fully parking the building underground, it would have an option that would be at grade and under the building. And then this is a different concept. This one was called the Heart, and this puts the library as well as the intergenerational center or the senior center and or rec community center on the city hall, existing city hall site, as well as the parking lot next to city hall. And it would move city hall into the existing senior center building. And then the transparent box, I guess I should mention, the massing that you see for the transparent box, that represents what is allowed under the current zoning. So most of downtown Middleton is zoned downtown mixed use, which allows 5 stories in height by right. And it's the only zoning classification that allows a 0 lot line development. The consultants that we worked with put together cost estimates. You can see the ranges that they provided. This is going back to 2020, and they were providing a 2025 estimate of a range of 60 to 84 million. It is highly likely that that cost has gone up quite a bit with the cost of construction increasing so dramatically since the pandemic. And then another thing that we discussed was different opportunities for funding strategies. So looking at general borrowing, TID 3 financing, which really at this point is not likely to be a driver because of the potential to close the TIF district early and possibly take advantage of the affordable housing extension. Library impact fees are a potential funding source that I think the council will need to consider. We have recently retired impact fees that we had in place for a couple of the public facilities, the fire and police building. So those have kind of come off being charged to new development. So that could be an opportunity to implement a new library impact fee. And then we also think that fundraising could be a possibility, especially for library, senior center, and community center. And then grant funding may also be a possibility to make up some component of the costs. So as a reminder, the tasks that we have completed so far is the council approved a public engagement strategy and approved sustainability goals. All of the documents, both those that have been approved and are in final form, as well as all of the draft documents, are available on the city's website at cityofmiddleton.us/CCC if you want to go and look through those documents to get up to speed. The tasks that are remaining under the current scope of work is to complete the enhanced public engagement strategy, approve the space needs, develop a recommended design, and then develop recommended cost estimates. So the community campus plan has been largely on hiatus since March of 2020 at the very beginning of the pandemic. We did have a couple of meetings and we got some direction, and we also have reformed the committee now. And our committee has selected a regular monthly meeting date. So they will now be meeting on the fourth Thursday of each month from noon to 1 in hybrid to accommodate people who want to join over their lunch break for work. And then we also, given that we stepped back on having city staff members as voting members, those staff members have joined an advisory team that will be meeting opposite the committee meetings so that everybody has an opportunity to help to put the agendas for the meetings together and make sure that we have all of the staff members' voices at the table. Our staff team did have a meeting to revise what we're proposing as an expanded scope of work, and we have provided that to our consultant team for pricing, and we will have that available for our finance committee and council to review at your next meeting. The expanded scope of work was unanimously supported by the staff, but the community campus committee did not have a quorum to meet at I guess this month. So they have not yet reviewed the expanded scope of work. Some of the feedback that we had discussed with our committee when they last met was a need for more differentiation between the concepts. I showed the square footage needs as well as the preliminary cost estimates, and you could see that the range was the same under all three of the options that had been provided. So what we're hoping that they can provide with this expanded scope is some more differentiation, which would give the Common Council more choice. We also would like to get an itemized list of a mechanical analysis that would look at how we can rehab and renovate existing facilities and making sure that we're factoring in life cycle costs associated with rehab, as well as meeting the city's approved sustainability goals and how we can do that with retrofits. Our IT director has been involved recently with our process as well, because any decisions that the city makes will need to also consider the IT functions and make sure that those costs are provided for as well. The revised scope or the expanded scope will include some additional information that we need in order to evaluate the community center component. That part's a little trickier because we don't have a community center currently, so it's not like we have baseline information to evaluate that. And it can also include providing more information about what programming needs there are in the community that could be accommodated through the new community center. And then we also will need to update the senior center space needs study as well as the libraries study, because the original scope of work did not include a space needs study for the library. They had at that time recently done one, but that study is now outdated. And you can see on the bottom right, this is they were using the Department of Administration population projections in the library study, and their projections were based on a 2040 population of just over 23,000, and we have surpassed that number already in 2024. So the expanded scope of work, which is included in your packet, includes 6 parts. The first is space needs, expanding the scope of work related to space needs for each city program, and specifically breaking it down to current, near-term, and long-term space needs. Part 2 would be looking at rehabbing existing facilities, which would include a full investigation of costs related to rehabbing our existing facilities. Part 3 would be evaluating the programming needs of the community center and establishing space needs. And then also evaluating whether or not downtown Middleton is the best location for a community center. I know there's even questions amongst our staff about, if you wanted to center that on Equity, is this the right location, or would you want to locate it in another part of the city that would provide more walking and transit access to that facility? We have written the expanded scope of work so that each part can be standalone. So in other words, when we provide the cost estimates to the council, you can determine whether or not you want to proceed with each part. So if you decided, we're interested in the community center, but we don't want it to be part of this study, that would be an option. And then part 4 would be providing more differentiated options. In particular, we want to have a new construction option. We have a few of those right now. We would also like to have a rehabilitation option and then something that would provide a hybrid. So it would be some rehab and some new construction. Part 5 is pandemic considerations. We've had a lot of changes with the way that we work post-pandemic, and so we want to make sure that that's factored in. We do have a limited number of staff members that are still working partially remote. I don't think we have anyone who's fully remote, but we do have some staff members who maybe work 2 days remote and 3 in the office. So that's something that should be considered. And then number 6 is we want to make sure that at the end of this process that our consultants have answered any questions that are needed from the council as well as staff so that they can help the council prioritize the options and select a preferred option. And again, just to mention, this work here does not include architecture and engineering, which would be required under any one of the 3 options: new construction, hybrid, or rehab. So that was all that we had prepared for you, but we're happy to answer any questions.
Anybody have any questions? Comments? Go ahead.
Thank you for that presentation. The sustainability goals, I know those are approved, but do they need to be updated to see if they're consistent with our LEED certification and Soul Smart or anything else that we're striving for?
I think it's highly likely, yes. And our sustainability coordinator is part of our staff team, and she raised that at our last meeting because it is, best practices are continually evolving. So we want to make sure that we're still meeting the best practices.
Okay. And recognizing that the ideal would be to have a building or a few buildings in a campus to house all of our city functions. Is there any will there be any effort to look at taking advantage of vacancies in office space that have resulted from the pandemic and people working from home in other in businesses?
That's not part of this current expanded scope of work. If that's something that the council would like, we can talk with the consultants about what that would entail. The challenge with that, not to say that we can't do that or we shouldn't look at other properties as they come up or become vacant. The challenge with the municipal building is that you then lose your ability to control the destiny of that property long term. So if you are a tenant in a building, you may have a long-term lease, but you might at some point no longer be a tenant in that building. So that would be a consideration that the council would need to think about. But we can ask the consultant if that's something that could be priced out for consideration.
Okay. And then finally, so going back to sustainability as a value, as a cost, is there any way to factor in retrofitting, not requiring massive amounts of new concrete and just the energy that goes into creating a new building, tearing this one down, creating a new one versus taking what we have and remodeling it and retrofitting it. Because I think that, given Middleton's emphasis on achieving our climate goals, it seems to me that that should somehow be a decision point or something to compare the options on. Do you understand what I'm saying?
Yes, and I think in part, some of the answers to those questions will be based on what the MEP study, the mechanical, electrical, and plumbing analysis does. It could be the case that the buildings can be substantially retrofitted, so that would then be a, and I don't know what that dollar figure is, but let's say it's X, and the council decides that is preferable then to building new construction, and we can get most of what is needed in a substantial retrofit. That would be an option that the council could have. The other alternative is that the MEP could come back and say, no, that the life cycle of these buildings, are beyond their useful life, and you would have to expend, a substantial amount of money to retrofit the mechanicals, the HVAC systems, all those things to get to what you want. And so then the council would have to weigh those two things. But our hope is that, since we didn't do an MEP back in 2019, the MEP should hopefully be able to shed some light on what is the viability of a retrofit option.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, just an observation over the last 5-6 years since this started. As I walk downtown every day and it's gotten busier and busier and busier, crowded and more crowded. And while I really appreciate the concept of putting everything in one spot, putting that whole one spot right here, it just seems to me that you're going to have some transportation issues. Part of the city plan is to increase the amount of walkability, non-carability, and sort of, I think that a lot has changed in the last 5-6 years. So I just hope that the committee really thinks about really hard on what we're going to do to how many people and cars we jam into this downtown. So I'm encouraged that you're at least thinking about other places where you might be able to spread some of that out. So, but we'll see. I think it's good.
Anybody else there?
Just so you know, I have put out requests for committee members for the community campus. I just want to make you all aware, if you know someone who has experience with buildings or HVAC, the green materials. I did ask some of the green team if any of them are interested. And I also want to say, Jennifer Cole, it was on there prior to her being in office. So I did ask if she can step off. Maybe that got missed, and I didn't share that with the leadership here. She's on the Community Development Authority. So if we need her to keep going because of quorum, maybe we can keep her on for 6 months. But if you have another person, that would be someone I'm looking to take off, not for anything she has done or not done, but just since she's already on another committee, to give some fresh set of eyes. So.
Anything else? Anybody? Oh, go ahead.
Yeah, just a question, and really condone you for engaging the public. Seems like there was a pretty significant public engagement process. And just curious, have we gotten a lot of public involvement and engagement and comments in this to date?
We have, but I would say that just given the amount of time that has passed since we started working on this, most of the public engagement that we did was in 2019. So it would be helpful to go out and, survey the community again, and that is part of the expanded scope.
Thanks.
Yeah.
I will tell you, when I did tours, the idea, the concept of where this was and where it was going came up a lot. And I will say people sort of had a max dollar amount in mind. And it was usually around 50 million, give or take 10 million. Now, if some of the other dollar amounts came in, that might offset it if we are doing the larger project. So if you're talking to constituents, it seemed that they were open-minded to a referendum, to cover that difference, understanding that they want these updated amenities and to support our senior center, to support our library. They often would say they love the library right where it is. But if you talk to the library, we're already growing as a city much faster. So they do need space. So there's a lot of moving pieces to it. So I would recommend, especially to our newer alders, to talk to neighbors, talk to constituents, see if they remember what they were thinking, see if they have any thoughts, and it may help you, have a nice breadth of thoughts. But I want to say thank you to Abby for sharing this. It was a very succinct presentation, and it gives you, we had a lot of discussions in 2019, and there really was a lot of good support from the community back then. And to pull together like 5 years of ideas into a half hour, just thank you.
Anything else? Thanks for coming in. Thanks for staying late. Appreciate it. Next, we're going on to discussion on the process for scheduling public hearings and votes on items before committees, commissions, and boards and the Common Council.
I will defer to my colleague.
Yeah, I guess we talked a little, well, this issue's come up a number of times, and most recently it came up with this hypothetical meeting that we had a discussion that probably had public comment going on for over an hour and a half. And the very first item on the agenda was to vote specifically on the thing that the hearing was about. And we had a lot of confusion out of that meeting, but it just seemed to me, I've seen this a few other times, that it makes absolutely no sense. Particularly when the chair of this meeting sat there and said, wow, we heard a lot of comments. We have a lot to think about. And up there on the screen was next agenda item. So I think as a general purpose, we've been hearing more and more from people talk about them not trusting the city, or we're not being transparent enough. And the idea of putting together an open hearing, open meeting, or whatever, a hearing on something on the very same day you're going to vote about it, just seems to fly in the face of the transparency issue. So I would strongly recommend we consider, at least discuss this idea of not setting those two, I mean, when we're making a schedule, I don't know that this takes laws or motions or anything, but I think it would be good practice not to do it. So that's my
Can I
thoughts
ask a
on that.
question? Can I ask a clarifying question?
Yeah.
There's one thing to have public comments on something that's coming up on the agenda.
No, this was a public hearing.
Yes.
Okay.
So
Well, no, actually, the meeting, you're right. And the question wasn't.
no, the meeting you're talking about was a public hearing and there was a vote scheduled.
Yes.
Yes.
On the same evening?
On the same evening. And that happens in the Plan Commission that came up with the, we had for the school district fields, we had the hearing and then we had the votes on the amendment to the comprehensive plan and the zoning code, like all at the same time. And and we do this for finance too. This is just a practice that the city has had for years, but our budget meeting for the council, when we consider the budget, we vote on it the same day as the hearing. And that just seems like, or even if we schedule it, it's, the final vote might be a few days later. It just, I feel like in the interest of openness and transparency and making sure that our constituents are aware that we do take their input and do something with it.
Mhm.
It's a good practice for many things, maybe not all things like a liquor license or something, but for many things where there's a public hearing required, I think the vote should, as a matter of practice, always be scheduled at the next meeting, not the one where the hearing takes place.
Yeah, I think I'd agree with that line of thought, especially because I feel like I get a lot of emails from constituents after public hearing, right? So they're like, oh, well, I didn't think about this, but I heard it at the public hearing and now I want to put my input in as well. And so that just gives us more time to really hear from the people we represent and get feedback before weighing in ourselves on that decision.
Yeah, college.
Just, yeah, so I'm just thinking out loud here on this one, but like a potential downfall of this would be we would be requiring people that have a significant interest in an issue to attend 2 meetings. And just bringing that up for consideration. So that might be a concern for some people, that, you know, the typical what people are used to is providing comment, the meeting, and then a decision is made. And if we made this a normal course of practice, those folks would have to attend 2 meetings.
I see that point, and it is a valid point. I wonder though, in the case of council hearings, and I can't remember, it's been a long night. I can't remember how many hearings we have in council. The budget is one. It would give those people who are passionate about something 2 opportunities to weigh in at the hearing and then before the council. Planning Commission doesn't entertain comments from the public. And I don't think the Landmarks Commission does either. But that is a good point. And, you know, Alder Schaefer and I don't have a proposed ordinance change to recommend, or as he said, I don't even know if we need an ordinance change for this. But I do think it's, especially for the big things like the budget and like anything that's going to impact development. Those are things that to make it clear to the public that we're listening, and to give us time, as Alder Madden said, to give us time to digest what it is that we heard and, you know, really think about our position and maybe talk to some more people. I think we need to build in that extra time.
Yeah, I guess I would concur to it, well, because I understand the time issue, but the issue of us understanding what's going on is, I think, even more important. We ultimately have to make a decision. And I think it's more critical that we have time to reflect on these comments than it is to not have somebody necessarily go to 2 meetings. I mean, somebody can still miss the public hearing and show up at the council meeting. And it would be no different than sort of what we're doing with this thing. But I think as a general practice, I would like more time to think about what people say.
Brian.
Yeah, we've kind of heard your concerns on this. And so some of the things that we're looking to do to try to address it on the budget side, you know, as we're looking at the schedule, for example, just in 2025, trying to be mindful of when that public hearing would be scheduled separate from the actual final action on the budget. There are some constraints in terms of like legal notice requirements under state statute of when we have to publish the full notice for the budget. And there's information and decisions that the council needs to make and information we need to get from other sources in order to be able to get that notice in the right format that it needs to be published in the newspaper. So in past years, that has kind of dictated when the public, you know, when we could meet that legal notice deadline and still have the public hearing. But knowing about it, you know, that's a concern this far ahead of time. The finance director and I have been talking about, you know, how we can make sure that that is achieved to the extent we can for 2025. On the planning items, you know, one of the things that I believe the Planning Commission has talked about in past is having, you know, authorizing staff the ability to set a public hearing date without having to have the chair of Planning Commission or the Planning Commission as a body formally adopt, you know, the notice that a public hearing will be scheduled 2 weeks later. That saves 2 weeks. If once an application is received for a zoning or planning action and it's been deemed complete, then staff would have the ability to notice the public hearing, have that happen, and then save that 2 weeks for, you know, the next meeting after that. So it's one thing that the Abby and her team are taking a look at as well. So, you know, we hear what you're saying and we're trying to think creatively about how to address that.
Thank you.
Anybody else? Oh, Alder Lorman.
One of the I guess, things I'm gathering from this conversation is, and I've also got it from constituents, is communication. It's interesting, you know, people sort of wake up, you know, when they see the building going up, and then they're like, why did the city do that? And I explain to them, well, that decision was made 6 months ago. If we have, you know, just using maybe some of the tools we have in our toolbox at the city level to actually be more proactive about communication, kind of in general, like a summary sheet, you know, a water bill is sent out quarterly, or anything that we, you know, kind of always get out to the city in general, but include additional information with that to remind citizens, hey, go out and subscribe the listserv, go out and be sure to check, the city website. And I would then encourage city staff to work with, our communications director and really set high priorities on making, the city focus on what messaging we want out there. So, do we want to really make it a priority to let the public know, hey, we're having meetings. The meetings are this date, this date, this date, this date, hearings on this date, this date, this date. Right now, people have to noodle around a little bit, and figure out where the agendas are, get into the agendas, get comfortable with the format, click on the PDFs, and dig down. So do we want to change our messaging to the general public to put and call more of our city business out there for hearings and for these types of things? I mean, it's up to the city, it's up to us to maybe guide that messaging for the general public. I don't know, I'm just throwing it out there.
I guess I agree with everything you said, but it still doesn't give me the time I need for when those citizens finally do show up, and I will have more of them show up at the meeting from when they give their testimony to when we have to make a decision. So I'm 100% in favor of what you're saying, but I still think we need to separate these two.
Sure. I just, lumping it all together because if we have, I'm just hearing that we're having, concerns about communicating and transparency.
Sure.
So are we getting enough information out there consistently for the public? I think there's a lot of improvements we could make on our website, in terms of navigation, in terms of, thinking in terms of what do we want the public to know is going on, within the city, call it more governance process.
Alder Nairo?
I totally agree, and I agree with Alder Schaefer as well. I see changing the scheduling as a way to remove something that conveys negative interest in what the public has to say. Because honestly, if it's like the example Alder Schaefer mentioned, if the hearing is there and the vote is the very first thing and the vote is taken, it's clear in my mind, it sends the message that no matter what we heard, everybody either formed their opinion on the spot or knew what they were going to vote before they came in. But on the subject of communicating, I think getting, doing the positive action of getting better information out to the city residents, I think that is critical. And I would love to see that on a big discussion of that on a future committee of the whole meeting. Because I know we can do certainly a better job than our local news sources do, a more complete job. And I think it's really important that we fill a gap.
I take your point, and I'd like to add a communication agenda item to our next COW meeting. So I'll make sure that gets on. Any other discussion on this item? Could I have a motion to defer or postpone item number 4 in our discussion?
We really wouldn't be taking any action. I mean, it's substantive item for you to actually vote on, so we're just discussing it.
Do you want me to go for it?
No, so I'm saying that there would not be a motion that's needed because it's just discussion at this point.
Oh, I see. So we can just skip it. Okay, time is not allowing. So we have an identification.
Misunderstood you. You're asking about item number 4, right?
I'm talking about item number 4.
Thank you. I can provide just a quick update on that. That'll be an item for future discussion of council. The Public Works Committee will be talking about this topic, the rapid flashing beacon at the meeting on June 10th, talking about the potential for a policy to help guide those discussions. And once we get a recommendation from the Public Works Committee and potentially by that committee, they'll come back to council for formal consideration at a future date.
Perfect. So we've identified, moving on, identification of future agenda items. Putting communication with our constituents is a great item for another meeting. Does anyone ever have any other ideas for another meeting? One of my ideas was, what are our responsibilities to our constituents post weather event or something urgent, what are our responsibilities to our constituents? What things can we offer to help? So I think that would be another item. Anybody else?
I was gonna
Hold your
suggest
breath.
that same thing.
Great.
I was, and just probably because of recent events and.
Yeah, yeah,
And what, and even an update from the city as to here's what we're doing and
yeah. Well, I
here are the
think,
things to expect.
yeah.
And
I thank Brian for sending out the updates on like how MG&E was working and
Yeah.
what they were telling us. And I just kind of keep my older business cards in my pocket. And when I go on my dog walks, I stay in the district, especially when it's something like that. And I just make sure when I see people or if I see a tree down, I just make sure that someone's been notified, and if not, I can get them directed to somebody. So anyway, not on the agenda, but
I think that's a great idea. And actually, it might even be worth discussing it, not just in the context of post-weather, but any emergency
Right,
or
right.
big event.
Right.
A couple things. We have an ongoing action item related to the committee consolidation and liaisons. We're going to get feedback from all the committees at some point for us to discuss in a committee of the whole meeting. So that would be one. Strategic plan prioritizing. Dan Foth mentioned the need to make sure it's always kept up to date. And I don't know if we have a set time frame for how often we prioritize. I think it was 2 years ago that we established the priorities that we have right now.
I don't want to get into discussion of this agenda item, but that is a previous establishment of the action priorities is in 2024. So as we get towards 2025 and moving forward, we'll look back at the priorities and establish them. So.
Okay, great. And then a workshop on housing or maybe another presentation, but also something hands-on, because we've all been through the discussions and the concern. We've heard the concerns expressed. We heard tonight about the need to go with what our comprehensive plan and our strategic plan say, and the staff have the expertise. And then we do make decisions that aren't necessarily consistent with either of those. And if you look at Middleton and think, where do we put more housing for the more people than anybody expected us to have, because we've already outgrown our predicted population. I think we all need to be on the same page and look at the map together and think about, where do you put the new housing that we're going to need if it isn't in taller buildings on transit lines and things like that. So I just feel like some sort of hands-on component related to housing would be eye-opening.
great. Good idea. Anybody else? All right, hearing none. That's our agenda. This meeting stands adjourned.